The sun was just beginning to rise over the sleepy village of Umuko, casting a soft, golden light over the red, earthy ground. The air was cool and fresh, alive with the sound of birds singing as people bustled to start their day. Umuko was a small village where everyone knew everyone. Children ran barefoot, playing games and calling to one another in loud, cheerful voices, while the grown-ups shared friendly greetings as they went about their morning tasks. In the middle of all this, 9-year-old Amaka walked with a skip in her step, heading to school. She had her books pressed to her chest, her eyes bright with excitement. Today, she would see Teacher Jonathan again. He was her theater arts teacher, and Amaka adored him. Teacher Jonathan was like a magician to her, with the way he brought stories to life. He made her dream big dreams, dreams of standing on a stage and making people laugh, cry, and cheer. "I want to be a star, Mama," she had told her mother, Mama Ngozi, one night, her eyes shining as they sat under the moonlight, with fireflies dancing around them. Mama Ngozi had laughed, her gentle voice full of warmth and pride. "Then you will be a star, my Amaka." Her mother had touched her cheek. "But remember, the brightest stars are kind, brave, and strong." Amaka carried her mother's words with her as she walked to school. She wanted to make her parents proud. Her father, Papa George, was also proud of her dreams, though he sometimes teased her. "Our Amaka, the village's shining star," he would say with a laugh. She loved her family dearly. They were her world, and she knew they would always protect her. In school, Teacher Jonathan was the student's favorite. With his loud, clear voice and the way he moved his hands when he spoke, he could make even the dullest stories feel like magic. Amaka wasn't the only one who admired him, everyone did. But Amaka felt special because Teacher Jonathan seemed to like her best. He would always call on her to act out the most important parts in their class plays, and she felt honored every time. One day, after the other students had left, Teacher Jonathan called her back. "Amaka, wait for a moment," he said, smiling kindly. "I'd like to help you with your acting." Amaka's heart raced with excitement. She was eager to learn more, to become better. She stayed back, and as he taught her how to hold her hands, how to project her voice, she felt thrilled to have this special attention. But as the days went on, she noticed small things that made her uncomfortable. Teacher Jonathan would sit too close, his hands resting on her shoulder for a bit too long, his eyes watching her in a way that made her feel uneasy. Amaka didn't understand these feelings. She only knew that something felt wrong, but she couldn't explain why. She was afraid to disappoint him, and even more afraid to tell her parents. They trusted him completely. "Teacher Jonathan is a good man," her mother would say. "He only wants to help you grow, Amaka." So Amaka kept quiet. She pushed the strange feelings down, hoping they would go away. Jonathan would speak in a voice that felt wrong, he would touch her in inappropriate parts, and he would speak in a voice that didn't belong to the kind, loud teacher she knew in class. "Amaka, you're special," he would say, his eyes lingering on her too long. "You understand things that others can't." Amaka felt her heart race, but this time, it wasn't excitement, it was fear. She didn't like the way his words felt heavy in the air, wrapping around her like a trap. She started to avoid him when she could, hoping he wouldn't notice. But Jonathan wasn't easy to avoid. He was always there, always watching, and Amaka felt more alone than ever. As time went on, Jonathan's actions grew bolder. When no one else was around, and other students were on break outside playing, he would take her to the staff toilet and have his way. Amaka could only cry in silence, begging him to stop as it was hurting her. This becomes a routine for Jonathan, and Amaka will only wish one day someone will hear her. Her only comfort was her father, Papa George. She wanted to tell him everything, to sit down and pour out her fears. But Jonathan's voice echoed in her head, his threats clear. "If you say a word, Amaka, I'll hurt your family. No one will believe you." So, she stayed silent, swallowing her fears and hiding them in the depths of her heart. And teacher Jonathan continues with his evil deed. Papa George started to notice changes in his daughter. Amaka wasn't the lively girl she used to be. She seemed quieter, more distant. At night, she would stare into the fire, her face drawn and her eyes filled with shadows. He would ask her if something was wrong, but Amaka would always shake her head, forcing a small smile and saying, "No, Papa, I'm fine." But Papa George didn't believe her. He knew his daughter's heart well, and he could feel the pain she was hiding. He began to watch Jonathan carefully, sensing that something was amiss. Though he couldn't put his finger on it, a father's instincts told him that his daughter was in danger. One day, he decided to keep Amaka home from school, telling her they would spend the day together. She seemed relieved, clinging to his hand as if he were her shield, her protector. And that day, he saw a glimpse of the old Amaka, his lively, laughing girl, and his heart ached with the knowledge that he was losing her to something he couldn't yet see. "Amaka, whatever it is, you can tell me," he said gently as they walked through the fields, the golden sun above casting warm shadows around them. Amaka looked at him, tears filling her eyes, but she shook her head. She couldn't tell him. She was too afraid. Days turned into weeks, and the strange feelings in Amaka's heart grew heavier. She could hardly look at her mother without feeling like she was hiding something terrible. Every time she caught her reflection, she wondered if she looked different, if everyone could see the fear in her eyes. Her once bright, hopeful dreams now felt tarnished. The stage she had once dreamed of felt distant and cold, and her joy in theater class turned to dread. After school one day, Jonathan cornered her again, his hand heavy on her shoulder, his eyes cold. "Amaka, you know you can trust me, right?" he said, his voice soft but filled with something that made her skin crawl. Amaka wanted to pull away, but she couldn't move. Her body felt frozen, her voice stuck in her throat. She nodded, hoping he would let her go. But as she stood there, she felt the weight of his words press down on her, each one sinking into her skin like a stone she could never throw off. She wanted to tell someone, anyone, but Jonathan's threats echoed in her mind, terrifying her. She was sure her mother would blame her, and her father, what would he think? She couldn't bear the thought of them looking at her with disappointment. And so, she stayed quiet, letting the darkness grow within her. Mama Ngozi noticed the changes in Amaka, too. Her laughter was rare, her eyes often shadowed with worry. Mama Ngozi tried to ask her daughter if something was wrong, but Amaka always shook her head, smiling a small, tight smile that never reached her eyes. One evening, as they prepared dinner, Mama Ngozi tried again. "Amaka, you know you can talk to me about anything, don't you?" she said, her voice soft, careful. Amaka's heart ached, and for a moment, she almost told her mother everything. She opened her mouth, her words trembling on the edge, but then she remembered Jonathan's warning. The threat he'd made if she ever spoke about their secret. Amaka swallowed her words, forcing a small nod instead. "Yes, Mama," she whispered, turning back to her task, her hands shaking slightly as she sliced yams. Mama Ngozi sighed, sensing her daughter's pain but feeling helpless, her mother's heart heavy with worry. One evening, Papa George decided to take matters into his own hands. He watched Amaka carefully, his eyes lingering on her small, tense shoulders and the way she kept her head low. He had seen enough. Whatever was happening, he couldn't ignore it anymore. "Amaka," he said one night as they sat together by the fire, "I want you to promise me something." Amaka looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Promise me that if anything is ever wrong, you'll tell me. No matter what it is." His voice was gentle but firm, his gaze steady as he looked at her, hoping his words would reach the fear that clouded her heart. Amaka swallowed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She wanted to tell him so badly, but the fear was too strong. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I promise, Papa," she whispered, though deep down, She felt her promise breaking even as she made it. One warm evening, as Amaka's family gathered for dinner, Jonathan arrived unexpectedly, carrying a basket of bananas. He greeted them with his usual wide smile, his voice cheerful and familiar. "I brought these from my farm," he said, setting the basket on the table. "They are fresh and sweet. Just for you." Mama Ngozi thanked him warmly, and they invited him to stay for dinner. As the family laughed and talked around the table, Amaka felt her stomach twist with unease. She watched Jonathan carefully, his gaze too steady, his smile too wide. Something felt wrong, but she couldn't explain why. Later that night, Amaka's parents each took a banana from the basket, smiling as they shared their last meal of the day. Bananas were their favorite evening snack, and they often ate them before bed. Amaka, however, remembered her earlier conversation with Jonathan. He'd asked her, offhandedly, if she liked bananas, and she had told him no. She watched in silent dread as her parents finished their bananas, her heart racing with a fear she couldn't explain. She felt something dark settle in her chest, a feeling that chilled her to the bone. The next morning, Amaka woke to an eerie silence. The village, usually alive with the sounds of morning routines and cheerful greetings, was oddly quiet. She felt a strange, heavy sensation in her chest as she went to check on her parents. She called out, her voice small and trembling, but there was no answer. Her mother's room was silent, her father's bed cold. They lay still, their faces peaceful, as though they were simply sleeping. But Amaka knew, deep down, that something was terribly, horribly wrong. She cried out, her voice breaking, and the neighbors rushed over, the whole village gathering in mournful silence as they realized what had happened. Her heart shattered as she watched, feeling like her world had collapsed in a single, terrible moment. Amaka's grief was unbearable, her heart aching with the loss of the two people she loved most. She felt as if a piece of herself had died with them, leaving her alone in the world, her dreams crushed beneath the weight of her sorrow. After the funeral, Amaka was sent to live with her aunt in a nearby village. The house felt cold and unfamiliar, and her aunt was stern, unsmiling. Amaka tried to adjust, but the grief weighed heavily on her, and she felt like a stranger in her own skin. She tried to tell her aunt about Jonathan, about the terrible things he had done and the way he had made her feel. But Auntie Ngozi didn't believe her. "Stop this nonsense, Amaka," she snapped. "You are making things up, trying to spoil the memory of a good man. You've lost your parents, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to create lies to hurt others." Amaka's heart sank, her last hope crushed beneath her aunt's disbelief. She felt utterly alone, her pain a heavy weight that no one could see or understand. Just when Amaka thought things couldn't get worse, her aunt's husband, Uncle Patrick, began to look at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Touching her inappropriately, he would watch her with the same unsettling gaze she remembered from Jonathan, his eyes lingering too long, his words smooth but filled with something dark and unkind. Amaka tried to tell her aunt, but Auntie Neka only grew angrier, accusing her of trying to ruin their family. "You are cursed, Amaka," her aunt spat one night, her face twisted with anger. "You want to bring ruin to this family, just as you did with your own parents." That night, Auntie Neka forced Amaka out of the house, her harsh words echoing in Amaka's mind as she stood alone, trembling beneath the starlit sky. She felt like a ghost, wandering through the darkness with nowhere to go, her heart broken and her spirit crushed. The night was quiet, broken only by the occasional call of night birds and the distant sound